time to write the last chapters of draft 3 of my novel is finally here. These last few chapters are really important and intense, and I know that it will have an emotional impact for me, so I decided to go to one of my favorite spots by the ocean to clear my head a little and prepare for writing these scenes. I grabbed a chocolate croissant and peppermint mocha and found a nice spot to sit in while I began internally reviewing the scenes that I had left to write. After I finished my breakfast, I took another moment to get myself in the headspace of my main character and others. This is going to be a very difficult time for everyone in the story, and I need to be able to convey that emotion in my writing. I wanted to stay for a long time, but it was freezing. Even though it was a short planning session, I did the internal work to start writing these last chapters, and I even managed to spot a seal, which I felt was a good omen. Now it's time to write the last chapters of Draft 3.
Well, I am thoroughly defrosted from my ocean adventures this morning. It was a very cold 25 degrees outside, and it was very windy, and I felt like a popsicle by the end of my short time outside. I'm back at home. I had some soup for lunch. I've warmed up in the heat, and I am ready to start writing the end of draft 3 of Project Lily. And if you're new here, my name is Stephanie, and I'm writing my very first book, which is Project Lily. That's the book we're finishing today. This morning was really helpful in terms of reflection and planning for the end of this draft. I have 4 chapters left. I will be starting chapter 40 today, and I have 43 chapters planned for this novel. We'll see what happens by the time I get to the end, but these last 4 chapters are pretty much an ongoing sequence, so this is the perfect time to begin recording the end of this writing journey for this draft. It has also ended up being really good timing because I have a bunch of travel coming up and family things for Christmas, and this is pretty much the last weekend I have to dedicate to writing for most of the rest of the year. And typically after writing a draft, I let it sit for a while. So if I can finish it in the next 4 days, I'm giving myself 4 days, then I will be good to go, and it'll be the perfect break because in 5 days, I'm starting my first trip, and that kind of kickstarts my whole Christmas stuff. And I would really love to have this draft finish before all of that happens. I'm ready to go ahead and start writing. As I said, I've been planning it this morning. I'm really excited. These last few chapters are going to be really intense. There's a lot happening, and I think it will be really fun to write. I'm going to go ahead and get started because I'm very anxious to do so, and I will check in with you throughout this process and let you know how I'm feeling, how the chapters are going, and what I'm noticing along the way.
I worked on chapter 40 for most of the afternoon and evening. I made myself comfortable and enjoyed all the Christmas vibes. However, I wasn't able to finish the chapter in one day because it ended up being quite emotional for me, and it took a lot of effort to write that, so I actually finished it up the next morning.
I'm done with chapter 40. It took a little bit longer than I expected, and that's okay. I wanted to make sure that it was exactly how I wanted it and that it was a very well-written chapter and had all the information that I needed. It also took a little bit of time because it ended up being a little bit more of an emotional scene than I thought. I know that my character is starting to go through it, and other characters as well. They're starting to have a lot of emotions. Things are happening. It's kind of like that darkest night of the soul thing going on. And sometimes these scenes, when I write them, hit me a little harder than I thought they would, and I want to make sure that I capture this emotion in an effective manner, because a lot of times I feel the emotion internally, but I have a hard time expressing it externally, and I wanted to make sure that I did a really good job with that for this chapter. This chapter ended up being around 2,600 words, which is fine, and I did cross 100,000 words while writing this chapter, so my novel is officially over 100,000 words, and I still have some more to go. We'll see what word count this ends up being, but so far that's a good sign that my book's long enough. I do want to go ahead and jump into chapter 41 because right now I'm a little bit behind in my schedule. In order to complete this within 4 days, I have to write 1 chapter per day, and chapter 40 took me a day and a half. I'm already behind, and I need to catch up. I'm hoping I can catch up today on chapter 41, but before I start chapter 41, I'm gonna take a break. I need a little bit of a breather after what I wrote this morning. And I also just want to get out of the apartment, get some exercise. It is snowing outside. It's the first snow I've had in my new apartment, and it snowed about 3 inches. And I want to go out and walk in the snow and have the snow falling down around me and just have fun. That is going to be my break for today. I am going to go play in the snow. It's going to be fun. And after I'm done doing that, I'll come back to my apartment and I will get back into writing with chapter 41.
It's the first snow of the winter season. I was excited because where I used to live before, there was barely any snow. This was a pretty solid amount, so I donned some waterproof shoes and ventured out into the cold. I had a really great time walking through the snow and seeing just how beautiful everything was. Snow is so peaceful to me, and it was nice to take a physical and emotional break from my writing by doing something that grounded me. When I returned to my apartment, I felt thoroughly frozen, so I made some peppermint tea to warm up. I sipped on that a while and started writing chapter 41. And I worked on chapter 41 through most of the day and evening. This chapter ended up being kind of a struggle for me, but though it was difficult to write, I did manage to finish writing it that night.
Chapter 41 is done. I actually finished it last night, and I just didn't get a chance to record till this morning because I finished it at like 10:30 last night. But it's done, and I'm glad it's done. It turns out I'm not really happy with this chapter, which is surprising because for the most part, I am happy with my chapters when I'm finished. I make sure that I'm satisfied with the writing and what's in there before I move on. And last night, I just was not having it with this chapter. This chapter has 2 really big events in it, and there is a big physical component to the chapter. There's a lot of action and scenery, and there's also a really strong emotional component. I think what this chapter has turned into is one of those instances where an author will say, I can envision it perfectly in my head, but when I put it on paper, it doesn't translate at all. And that's completely how I felt about this chapter. When I was writing it, the scene was so clear in my head, and I could see everything in detail. I knew what was going on. And as far as the emotional component went, I could feel it very deeply. I've mentioned before how sometimes characters' moods and emotions can rub off on my own. Last night when I was writing the end of this chapter, I was physically holding back tears because of that emotionality of what was going on. But then after I finished it, I let it sit for like an hour, and then I reread it. And what I've always been doing in this draft is after I finish a chapter, I go back and reread it and just fine tune it, see areas for improvement, fix it up, and continue on once I'm happy with it. I reread chapter 41 and I was so disappointed. I felt like my writing was not conveying the amount of, grandiosity of the events that were happening. And then also, as I was reading the emotional scene, I knew from a reader's perspective, it was supposed to be an emotional scene, but I couldn't feel and get the emotions from the writing. And this was so incredibly frustrating for me because this is an important chapter, probably one of the most important chapters in this whole book, and I feel like it really fell flat. And normally when I have an issue where I'm not happy with something, I sit there and fix it right away in the further drafts, and that's what I've been doing in this draft. I haven't been pushing anything off. But as I read it, I could not for the life of me figure out how to make it better. I was just sitting there looking at the computer screen with a blank stare, and just my mind felt empty when I was trying to figure out what to do. Maybe I could use more description, maybe I can use more internal dialogue, but when I looked at what I had written, I wasn't sure where I would need to include these things. This chapter ended up being 1,700 words, which is pretty short, especially for such a monumental chapter. And so I think what needs to be included is something that gives it more words, that gives it more weight, and can translate what's in my head to the reader. I thought about stopping for a while to try and fix this chapter, but I decided not to because, first of all, I'm still kind of clueless as to how to fix it. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I'm still not really sure. And then the other part is my deadline. I only have 2 days left before my holiday travels begin. And I think if I stop to fix this, I wouldn't be able to finish my book on time, which is actually really important for me. So I'm making the kind of difficult decision to move on to chapter 42. I do think I can fix this in draft 4, which is a good thing. And I think it may also work in my favor because draft 4 is where I'm going to be really diving into all the problems and figuring out how to fix them. So I can just add this one to the list. And hopefully as I work through a lot of the beginning stuff in draft 4, I'll figure out a way or come to a conclusion on how to fix the end. So with that being said, it is time to move on to chapter 42, the second to the last chapter. I'm really excited. I'm so close to the end. I think this chapter and chapter 43 will go really, really fast. These chapters are going to be almost 100% a rework instead of a rewrite. Chapters 40 and 41 were a complete rewrite. I had changed the location, I had changed the plot, and I just needed to basically start over from what I had in draft 2. And chapters 43 and 44, though, are going to be completely different. Everything's going to be the same. It's the same plot. Nothing has changed. I am changing the location, but really all that is like erasing one place and putting another place in and changing the description of the surroundings a little bit. It's not going to be a huge deal. I will have to take some characters out and put other characters in. Again, not a huge deal. What is important is the information is already there. The plot is already there, and a lot of the conversations are already there. And I think I'll move a lot more quickly just because I don't really have to come up with anything off the top of my head. I have the rest of the day to work on this chapter, and I really think I can do it and finish it in a timely manner. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started and write chapter 42.
I jumped right into chapter 42. I was starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, so it was easier to focus on completing this chapter. My big break today was to make some cookies. This is the recipe that I attempted and failed a few weeks ago, so I'm trying it again. The cookies did end up being perfect this time, so that was a relief. I settled back into writing after my baking break and finished up chapter 42.
Let me recap chapter 42 because I finished that last night, and it actually took a little bit longer than I thought it was going to take. I did have to change the scene and some of the people that were in it, and what I had to really work with was the dialogue in this one because I put in some new characters, and that meant they needed to, talk and interact in the scene, and that led to me having to basically rearrange the entire conversation from what I had before. So even though everything that was said was the same, it was all in a different order. And that was a little bit tricky for me because it was just very cut one line and paste it up. I keep the chapter below and I cut whatever I want from the previous draft and then put it into my new draft. There was a lot of cut and paste and just reading lines over and over to make sure that everything flowed. But I'm really happy with it. Like I said, the information is pretty much the same. It was just the order. So really it didn't change that much from draft 2. It ended up being 2,000 words, which is great. I probably could add a little more to this chapter in terms of emotion, but I honestly wasn't in a very emotional state last night in terms of my brain was shutting off. So I didn't have it in me. So that'll be something I kind of work on a little bit in draft 4. And now I'm on to the very last chapter, which is chapter 43. And then my draft 3 will be finished. It is really wild to me. It's so weird because when you work on a book for so long, it just feels like a never-ending project, especially when you're writing a draft. It goes on for months and it's just takes so long. And then now that I'm at the last chapter, it's just it's over. It just doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel like it's really gonna end and that I've really finished the draft because I've been working on this for almost 3 months, but here I am, and I'm ready to get into chapter 43. Like I said, for chapter 42, this is going to be pretty much an exact copy and paste from draft 2. I had to change the intro to the chapter slightly just because I'm changing an interaction between two characters, but it's not major and it'll be easy to write. And then I will just clean up what I already have for the rest of the chapter. I've got the rest of the afternoon to do this, and I know I can get it done, and I'm really excited, and I will talk to you after my draft 3 is complete.
It's time to write the last chapter. I couldn't believe I was finally on the last chapter and that this draft would soon be over. It was a short chapter, so over the course of the day, I finished it rather quickly. I decided to celebrate with some tiramisu. I got a good piece of it from the local bakery. And just look how delicious it is. It was fantastic. I dug into this the moment I finished my draft, and it was a good way to celebrate my achievement of finishing draft 3.
My third draft is complete. I have nothing left to write, and I have to admit I'm a little sad. As I was writing this last chapter, I just got kind of emotional in the sense that this was the end of my character's story, and I had the sense of sadness of it being over, and it was like this epic story, and now it's complete and it's done, and it was just a very weird feeling. It's the kind of feeling you get, when you read, like, I've had this before, you read the very end of a book or the very end of a series and you're like, oh my God, it's over. And that's kind of how I felt writing this. It was bittersweet, I guess is the best way to put it. It was actually a very easy chapter to write, even though I was a little sad doing it, just because it was that last chapter where you just wrap things up really nicely and everything comes to a conclusion, and that was easy for me to write. I'll just tell you word counts really quick. I wrote 1,300 words today. This chapter was 1,300 words. And my total word count for my novel is 105,846. That's actually lower than I thought it was going to be, and I think it's because these last 2 chapters were a little bit shorter than I thought they were going to be. I had estimated around 110 to 115. 105 is perfect. That's exactly where the length of this novel should be. So I'm really happy with the word count, and it took me almost 3 months to write this, just short of 3 months. This was a much more difficult draft to write than drafts 1 and 2, and I think it was because of the way I approached it. I did kind of like editing and rewriting as opposed to just rewriting. It took me a little bit longer. I also went on vacation during this, which also made this draft take longer. But overall, this was really fun. I feel like my story is finally coming together. Like, things are starting to make sense. The characters are a little more relatable. And I still have a lot of work to do. Draft 4 is going to be next, of course. But I am going to take a breather because I definitely need a break after this draft. And this was also a really busy last few days. I very rarely sit down and make myself write for long periods of time every single day. And I really just wanted to get this book done. I met my goal. It is the last day I have to write, and this book is finished. So that's great. I'm really proud of myself for locking in and really getting this done. The next steps for this is actually take a break. I need a break. And I have Christmas coming up. I'm going to be traveling, and I definitely won't have time to do anything writing related. So this is the perfect time for me to take a break. I will be working on book 2 for a little bit, just for an additional break. And then I will pick this back up at some point, read through it, make notes, and come up with a game plan for draft 4. I think draft 4 is going to be where I really dive in and try to fix all the major issues like plot and character. And I have an idea of how I'm going to approach it. It's going to be very different than how I've done the previous drafts. And I still want to think about it and make sure it's the right approach before I really talk about it. But I think it'll be a different approach than what I've done before. Well, that's it. I'm going to continue celebrating finishing the 3rd draft of my book. I already had my wonderful tiramisu, and I'm just going to enjoy the rest of the night and celebrate.